Since it is Yom Kippur, I want to start with a confession. I really didn't want to give a sermon about Israel, especially in my first year as your senior rabbi. It's not just that speaking about Israel is a lot like walking through a minefield. You've probably read the stories about congregations whose longtime members and trustees very publicly resigned over their rabbi's statements about Israel. When I spoke about Israel in Shabbat sermons or emails over this painful summer, I definitely heard from some of you. I welcome that, and I always will, because I hope that we'll begin our new relationship with honest and direct lines of communication, and with the humility to recognize that no one has all the answers about Israel. People of good faith can disagree, and people of our faith often disagree. So while it's true that stepping into this territory is daunting, it's not the reason I resisted. Nor is it that I question whether I could bring something new to this highly educated and well-read community. Peter Beinart, a prominent liberal critic of Israel, recently offered a suggestion to rabbis for the high holidays. Don't talk about Israel. He warned rabbis that Israel commentary is not our comparative advantage, and that speaking about Israel would undermine our authority and relegate us to B-grade pundits at best. But I'm not here to redraw the green line between Palestinian territory and the state of Israel, or decide which settlements should stay and which should go. I won't try to predict whether Hamas or Fatah will take the upper hand in Palestinian politics. And I'm not here to declare how much land Israel has to retain to defend itself against rockets, tunnels, and terrorists. I'm not a political scientist or a military strategist. I'm a rabbi. I live with questions of Jewish identity and texts and history in which Israel is central to everything. I was heartsick this summer, watching Israel once again at war. I hung on every communication from my young cousin who was fighting with the IDF on the ground in Gaza this summer. I felt anguish seeing the picture of those 4 young Palestinian boys killed on the beach from rocket fire, wondering if the Jewish state I love really was as careful as it could have possibly been. I hungered for moral clarity in a conflict that presented impossible choices. Amos Oz, the great Israeli novelist, began an interview this summer with this challenge. What would you do if your neighbor across the street sits down on the balcony, puts his little boy in his lap, and starts shooting machine gun fire into your nursery? What would you do if your neighbor across the street digs a tunnel from his nursery in order to blow up your home or kidnap your family? These were the words of a prominent founder of Israel's peace movement, a lifelong liberal lion. No one can answer these questions with absolute moral certainty, not any rabbi. But amidst these impossible choices, many sought clarity by making clear villains, and we watched Israel become further ostracized and demonized in the global community. This summer, Israel was fighting on several fronts to defend its citizens, its borders, its legitimacy, its very right to exist. Israel not only faces hostile Arab neighbors, not only a region in turmoil, not only anti-Semites around the world eager to vilify the Jewish people, but increasingly, Israel was challenged and spurned by some of us, including some of whom I count among my friends and this congregation. And so I knew I had no choice but to speak about Israel tonight. I needed to say how high the stakes are. Some of you will need no explanations. You were nourished with the love of Israel, and you can't fathom why Jews wouldn't feel the power and primacy of Israel in their very DNA. But others of you may not feel the innate relevance of Israel in your lives. I don't know that any one sermon can persuade you that Israel should matter to you if you don't already feel that way. But I had to try. I had to share on this Yom Kippur why Israel matters to all of us. And ultimately, it matters to our entire Jewish future. In addition to our ancient historical ties to the land of Israel as the birthplace of our religion and the cradle of our prophetic tradition, we must remember two of the most important grounding principles that undergirded support for the modern state of Israel. First, Israel was created as a necessary haven for Jews everywhere in the world, especially after the Holocaust, and in the event of other outbreaks of anti-Semitism. My husband Jacob grew up on stories of his German family, educated and assimilated, very much like you and me, who only reluctantly left their beloved Germany in the 1930s. Their Steinway grand piano and their engraved silver table settings seeming to mock how comfortable they just recently had felt. Jacob's grandfather, Rolf Buchdahl, the son of Adolf, not so popular a name for Jewish boys after the war. He was such a proud German, embracing German culture, whose music and literature he thought was the finest in the world. But none of that patriotism mattered when the war broke out. Jacob was raised on the narrative that if it could happen in Germany, it could happen anywhere. Now, I don't believe it could happen in America, not by a long shot. But tragically, even America hardened its heart against all too many European Jews desperately trying to come to our shores during World War II. There was no country in the world that made that promise. Israel is the only nation where the right of return for Jews is guaranteed. If the state of Israel existed then, how different would Jewish history have looked? Throughout my childhood, whether it was for Soviet Jewry or an airlift from Ethiopia, Israel was always the place where Jews could flee. Israel is the state that would take Jews in and give them a home and a job and the precious stability and normalcy of raising a family. Sadly, Israel as a safe haven is still relevant in 2014. Who could imagine we'd be talking about a resurgence of anti-Semitic sentiment and violence around the globe this summer? Who would have imagined French Jews would be leaving for Israel at a rate 60% higher than last year? That statistic is all the more astounding when you think about the fact that Israel was at war. French Jews felt safer in an Israel under rocket fire than they felt in France. With experiences like these in our two recent memories, how could we not respond to the idea of Israel as a vital refuge? And the second reason we feel compelled to support Israel is that the country is under a constant threat of annihilation. That's not just Jewish paranoia. It's the certainty of Israel's history and Israel's current reality. Yes, Israel has peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, and yes, the Palestinian national movement has changed over the decades. But this tiny country is surrounded by millions who want the Jewish state obliterated. This summer, we were reminded how Israel is in danger. The kidnapping and discovering of the bodies of 3 teenage boys was wrenching. The rocket fire was so menacing, and the tunnels, the scariest of all. How could we not be stricken by the thought of what was being hatched underground? We know it's a time-tested truth that nothing binds a people together more than a common enemy. Israel has very real enemies. Hamas, whose charter blatantly calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. Hezbollah and Iran, enemies committed to Israel's demise. And even Turkey, once a reliable friend of Israel, has become increasingly hostile. But this time, our common enemies and the specter of destruction did not unify all of us. In fact, a lot of American Jews, and most especially the young, sometimes talk as though the Israeli government is the real and only problem. Ari Shavit, the Israeli author of My Promised Land, one of the most important books on Israel in the last few years, spoke at Central this last spring. And Shavit shared his anguish that the greatest threat to Israel's existence that is too easily overlooked is the apathy, the Israel fatigue, and even the shame that the next generation of American Jews feel towards Israel. For most of our younger generation, the traditional narratives of Israel as a safe haven or as a beleaguered country fighting for its survival do not resonate. Many of them would say Israel is not essential to them. They've rarely or never experienced anti-Semitism. They feel safe at home here in America. The Holocaust has been relegated to ancient history. And they did not live through the battles where Israel fought for its very life in 48, 67, and 73. In fact, many would say that Israel appears from their vantage point not like the scrappy underdog fighting for its survival, but like a regional military superpower oppressing its neighbors. But this is not only a very narrow view of Jewish history, it's a very narrow view of Israel. So often, the only thing we talk about or read about or geschrei over regarding Israel is just one thing: politics. Now, I'm not saying we should stop talking about Israel's very real needs for security or stop engaging in nuanced conversations about the troubling policies of continued settlement building in occupied territories. But we need to see Israel as more than the sum of its military choices and governmental policies. I would venture a guess that nearly everyone in this room has been profoundly disappointed by an American president or a government in the last decade. Either you spent the Bush years saying, I can't believe this country I love is doing this, or you spent the Obama years saying, I can't believe this country I love is doing this, or maybe both. Regardless, you want to see this country thrive and prosper, no matter who's leading it, no matter what mistakes are made. And you wouldn't stand for anyone claiming that America doesn't have a right to exist just because in a given administration you believe its policies or decisions are misguided or even unjust. You haven't moved to Canada. We all know that America sometimes falls short of the magnificent ideals on which it was founded. It's hard to believe that the words on our Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal, who were written by many men who owned slaves and didn't give women the right to vote. But we believe in the founding principles of this country. And whether we're in agreement with the government in power at the time or not, our relationship is not dependent on the politics and policies of the moment. Thank goodness for that. And yet, for too many American Jews, our relationship with Israel is too contingent on the actions of whatever government happens to be in power. There is no depth to the relationship or connection to everything that Israel stands for. But just as our relationship to America would never be based solely on our feelings about Guantanamo Bay or drone strikes, our relationship with Israel can't be based solely on our feelings about the Gaza Strip and settlements. I have strong feelings about them, and they shouldn't be taken out of the equation, but they are not all of the equation. If that's all we know about Israel, we will never love. And I have to say it, I want you to love Israel. And I'm going to do everything I can to help you know the Israel that I love better. Because only in Israel do we land on the runway and people cheer and weep and kiss the ground, this ground that our people have been praying for and longing for 2,000 years. Only in Israel does the Declaration of Independence aspire to build a world as envisioned by the prophets of Israel, promising complete equality of all its inhabitants. Only in Israel would David Grossman's novels, Naomi Shemer's songs, and Yehuda Amichai's poetry seamlessly weave in ancient words of Torah with the entirety and the depth of the Jewish story into an Israeli culture that makes us weep and marvel. Only in Israel, a country of virtually no natural resources, would they invest so deeply in their only true resource, their people, and have the highest number of PhDs per capita in the world. Only in Israel do all school children learn the Hebrew Bible in its original language and then take field trips to the sites of King David or Samuel and walk in kings' and prophets' footsteps. Only in Israel can you unselfconsciously live in Jewish time, the city stopping on Shabbat, the streets empty of cars and full of people walking to shul. And on Sukkot, even the kosher McDonald's is bedecked with sukkahs so you can fulfill your mitzvah with your Big Mac. You can expect that as your rabbi, Central will still bring in speakers and policymakers who will talk about the very real and complicated political and military issues that Israel still faces. American Jews are among Israel's most important strategic allies, and we owe it to Israel and to ourselves to be educated and committed to Israel's safety and future. We owe it to ourselves to know what we're talking about, and even to disagree, civilly and knowledgeably. Real love does not wither when it faces imperfection. Real relationships are based on knowing. But it's hard to fall in love with someone who only wants to have heavy, hard conversations all the time. I want you to also know the Israel that makes me laugh and wonder and feel something so profound that I can't imagine being a Jew without it. So you can expect to see in the future, we will also bring in Israeli musicians and dancers and read Israeli literature and poetry. I'm proud that this fall, we filled to capacity 4 sections of a year-long I Engage Israel curriculum so that our Israel conversations will be based on study, not sound bites. And there, of course, is nothing like Israel firsthand. I'm leading a family trip to Israel this December. There's still room for you if you want to join. And you can expect I will encourage every one of you to go to Israel often. I wish it were easier. I wish Israel didn't live in such a bad neighborhood. But this land, it's vital to us. Chaim Weizmann, who became the first president of modern Israel, was lobbying the British government for the Jewish homeland. And a member of the House of Lords asked him, "Why do you Jews insist on Palestine when there are so many undeveloped countries you could settle in more conveniently?" Weizmann replied, "That's like asking why you drove 20 miles to visit your mother last Sunday when there's so many old ladies living on your street." Israel is our motherland. Israel is family. Israel is the birthplace of the Jews' greatest contributions of ethics and morals to human civilization. Israel is our safe haven. Israel is the beating heart of the Jewish people. And Israel is ours. Od lo avda tikvatenu. We have not lost hope that the hearts of Jews in America will turn to Israel and the hearts of Israel to us in mutual strength and common calling. We have not lost hope that Israel will forge a path to lasting peace and security with the Palestinian people and its neighbors in justice and goodwill. We have not lost hope that this tiny, embattled, miraculous country will write the next chapter of our remarkable Jewish story in a way that is worthy of our highest Jewish values. We are, after all, and above all, a people of hope. Od lo tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnot alpayim, liot am chofshi be'artzeinu eretz Sion Yerushalayim. Al hadvash ve'al ha'oketz, al hamar ve'hamatok, al bitenu ha'tinoket shmor eli hatov, al ha'esh ha'mevoeret, al ha'mayim hazakim, al ha'ish hashav habayta min ha'merchakim, al kol eile, al kol eile, shmor na li eli hatov, al hadvash ve'al ha'oketz, al hamar ve'hamatok, al nata kol ratua, al tishkach et hatikva, hashiveni ve'ashuva el haaretz hatova. For the honey and the bee sting, for the bitter and the sweet, all the things that join as one to make our lives complete. For the future of our children, for our prayers will never cease, for the hope